Good afternoon. Those of you who are returners to our friendly debates will recognize that music. It's homegrown. It's meant to make you feel a little bit more lively and happy in these very turbulent, sad, challenging, charged times that we're living in. Welcome. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Chief Operating Officer, Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe, and have the pleasure to guide and moderate this conversation around EU sustainability agenda, navigating it in a polycrisis world. And for that, we have the real rich contribution in terms of a report that's being launched here today by the European Environment Agency. And we have their top person here who's going to say a few words in a moment. But what we have in order for you today is a series of contributions from a range of folk. We don't have a politician on the panel for once, actually. You'll be surprised to know there might be someone in the room. But this is to be able to really understand how we... Hang on, I've got an echo here, just to let you know, and others can hear me. So my technical people, lovely, lovely people at the back, there's an echo here. Anyway, so... That's put me off. Sorry. Is that what we want to be able to do is understand, in the context that we find ourselves in right now. I mean, this year we know has been the festival of disinformation and multiple elections, and we've already seen the colour turn red in some parts, which might in some parts of the world means right, in others it means left. But we are lost, almost, I feel, in the world that we're finding ourselves in increasingly. And we have this sense that we're having to kind of capture our breath in terms of what might happen at the weekend in France, what might happen in November. And in between those two points, you've got the UK, obviously, on the 4th. But what's for certain is the uncertainty and unpredictability of the politics we are about to enter and witness. And it feels like the genie's out of the bottle in terms of anything is fair game. And one of the concerns that we have, and that's why this report is important, is to understand how do you vouchsafe the importance of taking action on climate change? How do you ensure that the deals that have been done up to this point don't become a sham? How does COP not continue to be a sham, but continue to actually create something that will move our world in the right direction and not just be a talking shop? So, on that lovely note, and in this lovely, now if any of you have been to the Far East, we are now living through monsoon season. Absolutely. Hot temperatures and wet as well simultaneously. This is what it's like being in India right now. Well, used to be like in India. It's changed in India and in Thailand and elsewhere. So we are living through a kind of an equivalent of monsoon season. But on that note, I want to invite Elena to join me here. Lena's going to be introducing the report and why it was important to have in the first place. So it's really good to have you back again. You were here just a month ago for another discussion of this type. But over to you to explain the report.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome to this event, also from my side. Event where we are launching a new report from the European Environment Agency, the Sustainability Transitions Outlook. STO report among friends. I'm not going to introduce the whole report, so there will be more presentations on that note, but I give you some introductory words. And one word is polycrisis in the report as well. So this is the rather disturbing term which has come to be used to describe the current context in which our societies and politics operate nowadays. It describes a convergence or mix of economic, social, geopolitical, and environmental crises, which together then create systemic risks to the world as we know it. The EU's efforts to transition to sustainability now take place within such a polycrisis context. And since the launch of the European Green Deal only in 2019, Europe has faced many major shocks and challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and the resulting energy and economic shocks, as well as a surge of, indeed, political populism, often related to issues around migration. At the same time, climate change continues to escalate in an unprecedented speed and with increasing impacts around the globe. and also here in Europe, the world's fastest warming continent. And together these challenges impact Europe's food, water and energy security, as well as the continent's macroeconomic and social stability. And they put environmental policy implementation under strain. The recent EU elections represent a shifting political context, surely, and narratives are also changing, as shown in the recently adopted strategic agenda as well. However, the core principles of the European Green Deal remain. The need to address the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, it is as urgent as ever. And European citizens are seeing the impacts with their own eyes, and they are very concerned. The nature of the polycrisis means that now, more than ever, progress towards environmental protection and restoration must go hand in hand with justice and equity. And while the EU has established instruments like the Just Transition Mechanism, more integration between justice considerations and environmental goals is also needed. And justice is, by the way, not only limited to economics. Take health. Health inequality is made worse by climate change and environmental hazards, emphasizing the need for adaptation policies which prioritize equity, redistribution, and protection of the most vulnerable in society. Our STO report we are presenting today here underlines the importance of anchoring long-term sustainability thinking within a range of other policy priorities. It also highlights issues around social fairness and the way that the economic impacts of sustainability transitions, whether real or perceived, are felt differently across social groups and economic sectors. This was evidenced by the widespread protest by farmers, for example, in Europe earlier this year. So we are going to need to reconfigure our social systems. We must be open to new ideas and ready to contemplate bold action. The current global geopolitical context means that the EU's transition to sustainability faces significant obstacles, and this will require a delicate balance between short-term responses and long-term goals. Strategic foresight can help with this, and it is at the heart of this report. Strategic foresight is a conceptual tool to anticipate risks, identify opportunities, and inform policy decisions in a context of uncertainty. Foresight provides policymakers with the framework for strategic long-term planning and crisis preparedness, even in the absence of full certainty and developed scientific evidence. It helps address uncertainties and complexities by leveraging different forms of knowledge and expertise. And it enables policymakers to navigate complexity to make informed decisions that promote resilience and sustainability. As the report says, it is not about predicting the future, it is about helping build the future. The question facing us now is this. So how can we anchor sustainability goals across a plethora of emerging priorities, including competitiveness, security, and a just transition? The European Green Deal, as such, already goes a long way to positioning climate and environmental goals at the forefront of economic competitiveness, advocating for a shift towards a green and digital economy. However, this requires an alignment of public and private financing mechanisms with long-term objectives and the mainstreaming of climate and environmental considerations into all areas of policy. It also means we will need to foster sustainable well-being approaches that transcend our current GDP-centric economic model and which highlight the co-benefits of investing in climate health and nature protection. At the same time, by integrating security objectives into our transition towards sustainability, we can address climate-induced risks while also enhancing strategic autonomy and promoting global leadership in sustainability and the green economy. And all this will be vital if we are to realize our goals. A renewed narrative around sustainability must prioritize, as I've referred, to societal justice, equity, and dignity. It must address interconnected crises, aligning short-term actions with long-term sustainability objectives, and foster inclusive participatory governance. In this way, sustainability becomes not only a long-term and sometimes rather vague goal, but also a crisis management strategy for the here and now. For our agency, the EEA, this report is quite a new type of report, so it represents really something special. Although it's based on years of work on foresight within the EEA, it represents a new type of knowledge product, which reflects deeply on complex issues which go beyond our traditional assessments. We are a knowledge organization, so data and indicators inform our work, and much of this analysis will come together in the upcoming edition of our 5-year flagship report, State of Europe's Environment, or SOER, and this is due for publication towards the end of next year, so 2025. However, the very complexity of the issues which we need to address as we look to the future requires us to go beyond the indicators and consider a range of future scenarios. And STO, this report is indeed a different kind of outlook. It is a reflection of the changing policy landscape and on fundamental questions around what it really means to live well within planetary boundaries. So this report is the result of participation and input from many stakeholders, some of whom I believe are here with us in this room today. And I would like to warmly thank everyone who contributed. And we look forward to continuing this collaboration in the future. And also a big thank you to our partners at the event here, Friends of Europe. So thank you very much for your attention. And I hope that the rest of today's session will be thought-provoking and productive. Thank you.
Lena, thank you so much. Thank you very much. As ever, you set the nice a framework and a context for this conversation. You're right. When I looked at it, it's the first time you've done something that is, and those of you who haven't had a chance, there's a QR code, you can download it, etc. But it's almost you've taken a whole of society, whole of economy approach. And what I mean by that is you've tried to completely think about it holistically, the issue holistically, in a way that we've not seen coming from the Commission or any of its agencies before. So well done to you. And it's the right time for it, because actually it's needed to make sure that we think holistically about the issue of climate and climate change, and think about it in the way that it will affect equity, social mobility, security, etc., and so on. But the only thing is, the structures of power and decision-making are not horizontal, they're siloed, unfortunately, and somehow that will, that affects our ability to navigate the future in the way that we might, but also in the unpredictable world that we find ourselves in, we can, we don't know whether this message is going to go down well, unfortunately, given that, we have, for the first time in Europe, in this way, other than the 30s and 40s, of course, that, right-wing governments in the Netherlands, in Italy, likely in France. I mean, think about what that's going to mean in terms of the narrative and the dialogue around climate action. But more of that from you, because just to say, you're not here simply as passengers, you're here to interact and use your brain and exchange with each other what you think. You don't get these opportunities often. And we're living at a historic moment of time, actually, just at this point in the week, when we think about what's gone and what's going to be coming up in the next 5 days, just on the European or continental front. So let's do take the opportunity to speak to each other. On that note, I want to invite the authors. We have Lorenzo online and Vadim here in person. Thank you both. As I said, a very sophisticated, holistic, thoughtful report. Both of you, say a little bit about what, from you, other than what Elena said, the key messages from the report, and I'm going to ask you that, but people want to know what are the kind of things that we should absolutely focus on that you feel need to be brought out. Vadim.
Lorenzo, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you for this invitation. Yeah, as Lena introduced, the report fundamentally highlights and acknowledges the changing context of the polycrisis. And this is absolutely relevant for informing the reflections about sustainability governance in the recent past and in the future. In this renewed context of the polycrisis, we believe that new and old concerns and priorities have been re-emerging, has been taking stage again regarding competitiveness, security, and fairness in Europe. And these has fundamental implications for the way we do sustainability governance and how, for example, the European Green Deal could be developed and implemented in the past 5 years. The risk that we see with this changed context is that there might be a tendency to respond to these renewed concerns, again, about competitiveness, security, and fairness, single-handedly somehow with the short-term view, which implies that climate and environmental goals may fall off the map, and we definitely cannot afford that. We cannot afford that because Europe's socio-economic system and well-being of the citizens depend crucially on a healthy and resilient natural environment, stable climate, and long-term sustainable use of resources. Therefore, we see climate and environmental policy as enablers of fair, resilient, and competitive Europe rather than the opposite. Europe cannot be competitive in the race to the bottom scenario on health and environmental standards being reduced. These are actually foundational for the whole European socio-economic model. Therefore, the essence of what we offer with this report is that we think there's value in reframing these priorities in a way that they embrace and leverage on the fact that the environment and health and healthy ecosystems underpin these priorities and their long-term achievement as well. And we offer anchoring ideas might be helpful in navigating the current times, linking up these priorities, emerging priorities, and long-term sustainability in order to navigate towards living well within the limits of the planet in the long term, which should not be reduced in priority, deprioritized in the next years, because these are, again, fundamental elements which sustain and enable our European model and the sustainability which comes with it potentially.
Maybe I also say something of this topic of polycrisis and where sustainability comes to it. I mean, it's worth repeating that polycrisis is really the moment, but it's not just a moment. It's a global long-term trend which will continue beyond the next Commission's mandate and maybe the one after that. It's
just the state of being as we know it.
So it is a kind of existential state of being which is almost larger than us. It creates all sorts of anxieties as a kind of fatalism. So this report is also a kind of a response to it, a response which is based on the idea of resilience, but also the idea of transformation. Meaning that our responses to these shocks should be both resilient and transformative, because we cannot go back to the baseline. The baseline disappears every day. But also what's important to know about the baseline, and that's what we learned in the course of working on this report, is that that baseline was also maybe part of the problem. It was also kind of a reflection of lack of sustainability on some of the core processes that we have in our economy and society. So in order to navigate the polycrisis, we have to transform continuously. And what if not sustainability thinking, which can help us to take like a red thread in this navigation of the polycrisis? So that's where sustainability comes in, and that's where the environment comes in, because this is a kind of a safe operating space for us to actually think about those other priorities, like security, like fairness, like competitiveness. These priorities, like Lorenzo rightly said, will have to be achieved almost, against the depletion of our environment, our continued unsustainable use of resources, very unstable climate. So we have to, instead of that vicious circle of responding to every crisis by giving more of our resources and tapping more into the environment, we have to create these virtuous circles whereby we replenish the environment, we make it stronger so that we can get stronger on these other fronts. And these are virtuous circles and anchoring ideas that we wanted to explicate in this report.
Okay, this is all good stuff. And intellectually it's really sound, and it's about time we took this holistic approach. So it's not a competition and or climate action. It's not trade and or, it's removing the and, it's just simply a introduce it throughout as a red thread, as you say. I mean, we'll come back to the issue of cost, okay? Because I think, and I want you guys to also question that as well. But you've got a number of scenarios in the document, and you use a certain methodology. Can you just explain that to our audience? Well, what do those scenarios mean? What are you trying to say as a result of them?
Yes, sure. Well, as Lena just said, it's a kind of a new product for us, new type of knowledge. And we really wanted to sort of make use of this new knowledge in this moment of uncertainty and anxiety. Of course, we need hard data. We need evidence. And we need policies that are based on this evidence. And we do that. But sometimes the world of politics works differently. And it's a world of contestation and contingency. And some people, some groups are thinking that this priority is more important than the other. Assumptions going into what defines the next policy cycle may differ. And so we wanted to embrace that moment of contingency and basically create perspectives like stories, almost fictionary stories, about what happens in the next 5 years if we only think about competitiveness or security or fairness. And what does it mean for our sustainability, wider, broader sustainability goals and long-term things that need to happen on the environmental climate fronts? So from these 3 stories, and we had a very interesting foresight process with stakeholder involvement, many of you are here. So we tried to look into the risks, but also the opportunities. And you see that in the report. So this was the method, combining the knowledge with the kind of strategic thinking, strategic imagination, as I may say so.
Love it. Strategic imagination. When did you last hear that? It's great. So you used data, which is the here and now, and you kind of pummeled that into the future, basically. Is that what you did?
We used the data in order to understand the parameters of where we are. What are the core sort of cascading risks? What are the core deficiencies? What needs to happen with the implementation of the European Green Deal? What needs to happen to achieve our environmental policy goals? And then we contrasted that with this kind of foresight process where there was almost like a fictionary figure saying that in the next 5 years, we'll only think about competitiveness defined through these kind of other criteria. And then what does it mean for the environment? What goals can we actually achieve if we only think about competitiveness? On what goals can we not achieve?
Lovely. It's a shame we can't do a digital twin of it. It would be great to actually visually see what you're talking about. It'd be fantastic. Okay, you've mentioned this is that kind of almost a new analysis and pathway of how we basically re-narrate the importance of climate action in a holistic way. How are we going to have to differ, or what do you see as being different in the next 5 years? Lorenzo, you're going to take this perhaps, as opposed to what we've experienced in the past 5 years. In the, it was the most, I suppose, longest gestation of a baby, which is the Green Deal, and the most painful birth, but it came out and became international news, and now it's suffering from being orphaned, unfortunately. So how's it going to be different?
Yeah, thank you. I think how it's going to be different. Well, we see the risk of climate and environment losing bit stage in the next policy cycle. And again, now we have a lot of ambitions being put forward, and also legislative processes which finally achieved a very important ambition level and now need implementation. So we really think that this is a fundamental point and important that might be characterizing the next policy cycle. But again, this can be in jeopardy given the emerging priorities we were mentioning above. But what we suggest in this context is that, again, competitiveness, security, and fairness should be looked together with climate and environmental action in a holistic manner, so that it can be understood as being potentially synergistic in many of the aspects. For instance, we can have increased security and resilience in Europe by looking at the many nexi between, for instance, climate and migration, water resilience and food systems, and climate change, and the sort. So we have to leverage where we see the opportunities to do so in order to make sure that we do not lose sight of the long-term ambitions of living well within the limits of our planet. The same applies to getting to a more fair society. For instance, inequalities could be reduced by leveraging on the nexus between access to clean environment and nature and health of citizens, or through action around taxation by making polluters pay while not threatening heritage and livelihood. And the same applies to healthy democracy, where heightened forms of participation and dialogue could be helpful in making action on nature and biodiversity conservation more effective, for instance. So we see challenges, but we also provide some suggestions and anchoring ideas, as mentioned before in this report, so that we can move together in a stable and potentially more effective framework, so that we can navigate the uncertainties of the polycrisis, but without losing sight of these important dimensions.
Yeah, maybe I just add also that we can look at the European Green Deal not only, rightly so, we should look at it as a very innovative, transformative framework, but also as a kind of way that we dealt with some crises already. And the European Green Deal has proven quite resilient. Maybe the crisis happened too soon, so really you couldn't just drop it. But I think what happens with Repower Europe or resilience and recovery mechanism, these were actually tests for the framework like the European Green Deal to withstand some of the crises of this global polycrisis, which will surely come in one or the other form in the next 5 years. So we could draw positive lessons from the agility of the European Green Deal and see how these lessons can be used in the future.
Okay. Well, I promise I'm coming to you. I've got one last question for them, and that is, at the end of the report, you say that you conclude by saying that we need to create a different kind of narrative about how we manage sustainability, but most importantly, climate action. I mean, you said a little bit about this, but what different do you mean? I mean, by concluding in that way, what do you actually specifically mean? Lorenzo?
Maybe Vadim would like to take this first. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Well, so there were a few points that we tried to make, a broader points towards the end of the report. And one of these is that we often think of sustainability as a sort of a nice place to arrive to. This is a destination, a far-flung destination, Europe 2050. But we suggest that sustainability can be really looked at as a sort of almost like a strategy to manage the crises as they go, as they come up in a transformative way, so that with every new crisis, we generate the resilience and the kind of potential to transform. And this is the kind of renewed narrative on sustainability. And another point that I want to make, which is maybe not so distinct in this report, maybe you can read it between the lines, but for this audience, surrounded by the Friends of Europe, I think sustainability has something about the broader European story too. Because we know that the European idea, the European project is based on the value of democracy, peace, prosperity. It's enshrined in the treaties. But what many don't know is that it's also based on the value of the natural environment, the protection and the regeneration of the natural environment. So it is an intrinsic part of our European story. And sustainability is not just about policy coherence or implementation of policies. It has also a bigger kind of ideological value for the European project and for its future. And that is also part of that renewed narrative on sustainability. Not simply a policy framework, not just a technocratic set of policies, but also a story for Europe.
Nicely
on
said.
That note.
We don't usually get that, not from an agency or a civil servant. It's lovely. I don't mean that against you, because you have to deal with constraints in terms of how you do the technocratic bit. Lorenzo, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to complement what Vadim has just said, I think there's something to the very nature of the polycrisis that calls for a reflection on the way we do governance, sustainability governance, because of the uncertainty and complexity. And something we highlight in many instances in the report is the need for embracing a variety of perspectives, acknowledging trade-offs, and moving from the idea of solutions, perfect solutions, to the acknowledgement of the fact that we have to go through processes of raise solutions collectively, rather than to take into this point that Vadim mentioned about the technocratic thing, as the quality of the governance is defined by the principles that define that. So we also have a little reflection about some key principles that are insightful in that context, in our view, which can be framed as thinking in systems, so interconnectedness, precaution, participation, again, this idea of broadening dialogue and participation, indeed, and experimentation and care. So,
Thank you. But one of the boldest things, which is a kind of reflection of our own society, the boldest thing you're saying is there's no need for trade-offs anymore. It's just the way to do it, and there should be just a different mindset and norm of how we tackle the issue, which is bold in itself. Colleagues, what do you think? Questions? Colleague here. I mean, don't be shy in saying you think it's a lot of twaddle, or actually have questions about it, or please make use of this lovely space we have to be together. Introduce yourself. Good to
Thanks.
see you.
I'm Luc Bas. I'm with the Center for the Climate Risk Analysis in Belgium. It's a new national center that has to advise the National Security Council on where these things become security issues. Fair enough to say that we struggle with how to translate them to get the interest from the Security Council, but that's just maybe the background for my question. And I think everybody's thinking about it. Why wasn't climate and environment or sustainability a major issue in the election campaigns? The ones that we see still happening, the ones in Belgium, the European one, it fell down the priority list in the thinking of the election campaigns. Why is that? And the suggestion that I see is that it's another narrative that we need. We need to recognize that the trade-offs are not always win-wins. So how did we explain enough the compensation measures, and what does that mean? Lena said redistribution. I think it's one of the key words in all this process forward. And because redistribution is such a political issue, you will struggle with getting politicians to speak out of it. So that's one. And then the security angle is something that it seems to be lagging back on the agenda as well. Although NATO has a great report out just now. Yeah,
because they've been fiddling away at this for some time now, which is good to know. But Luke, can you just give him the mic back, actually? Can you just give him the mic back, please? Yes. Yeah, because you've been, no, at all. Because you've been long in the game on this. You've done various stints in heading up stuff. Did you see this coming? Because I want to pose a question to you in terms of how little the dialogue there was by politicians and the issue of climate action in the political narrative around the European elections. Did you see it coming?
That's a very smart question. If I would have been able to see that coming, and others with me in the game, because there's many people that are active here, I think we might have been able to anticipate.
So
when we knew it was coming, it was too late, I think. We were not able to win the narrative back because we realized it too late. Maybe we took some of the achievements for granted on the Green Deal, and things that were going to go forward would go forward. And as I said before, I don't think we recognize enough, and this is the just transition debate and everything, but it's such a fundamental redistribution debate, and that might actually be the angle we need to approach here.
Yeah, because we've almost lost that argument. We've given what a mess Macron made when we had the early point was the Gilets jaunes issue, and actually not thinking through the social distribution and equity issues there. We find that politicians are just time and time again doing it wrong. But I'm interested by what yes, I'll bring you in. I'm interested because I'm provoking you. It's great. We have lady here, gentleman at the back in white, and the lady here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course, I have to contest this statement because I work for the Greens.
Good.
I'm the Secretary General of the Greens Group in the Committee of the Regions.
Okay, we're going to tweet you now, right?
I must say this is not true.
Yeah.
But as you know, in all those countries where the Greens are in government, be it Germany, be it Ireland, they got the price, they had to pay the price for it. So they lost in the elections, also in the national elections, like in Ireland. So I would say when you are really promoting green issues or whatever is connected to it, climate change, people don't, how do I say, they don't vote for you because also, and I'm German, as you can say, the party that won the majority in the European elections now in Germany, they declared the Greens as the strongest enemy in the national context and contesting whatever they've been saying. So I would say it's not just that nobody addresses the issue, it's also that there is a strong opposition and also a denial of the evidence provided by science, for example.
Absolutely.
So I think it's more complex than just to say politicians don't understand it. They
you're absolutely right. I mean, you speak to the context by which I introduced this debate, is that where we are now politically is the most fragile context for what this report is saying. We've seen it, and as you said in Germany, you are the enemy. It's ridiculous. And the fact that, facts don't matter, science doesn't matter anymore. It's actually, as I said, everything's up for a game. My point was that leaders are executing stuff on climate, which is actually pushing people away. So when you think about what's happened in the UK, in London, what happened in France, what's happening here, like don't bring your car in the centre if it's old, it's the poorest that are being affected and not being taken with you, and therefore you get this backlash. And so when you think about the adaptations that people are having to make, it happens quickly, there's very little support, and you get those who are in the poorest, who are suffering the most and thinking, what the hell? Why are you making this whole drama about it now if you've known about it a long time ago? That's what I meant, is that now they've created a context that now we have this debate.
I think you're quite right, and I think this is the conclusion that the Greens are drawing internally now, and they learned the lesson, but sometimes it might be a bit too late.
It's a bit painful and too late. With the gentleman at the back with glasses, white shirt, I will come back to all of you, I promise you. Introduce yourself again.
Yeah, my name is Joachim Spangenberg, currently a member of the Scientific Committee of the European Environment Agency. But many years ago, I was the founding chairman of Friends of the Earth Europe. And in that time, I participated in the preparation of the Rio conference in 1992. In that period, we were very optimistic that there would be a breakthrough for sustainability until 1991, when from the International Chamber of Commerce came a big campaign about economic security. And we had an immediate rollback. And ever since, I know security beats sustainability. And so it was to be expected that sooner or later something like that might happen. Second element is, my impression is that unless the UN Secretary General and other people on that level, none of the politicians I've been listening to in the EU has expressed the sense of urgency. And this sense of urgency, if lacking, means we can postpone these measures when other things are urgent now. And that has been a big obstacle against keeping sustainability with all its aspects on the agenda, because the sense of urgency was missing, and then everything else comes to the forefront, and so we do the urgent things and forget the important ones.
Okay. What do you see as, I mean, given that we've had a whole new generation, we've got Generation Z, Y, Z, etc., like 21-year-olds, 30-year-olds who don't really have that sense of history. How do you see it moving forward now? Because, you're right. When you think about the fact that IPCC produces reports saying, we're out of time, you've got, and they say that you need to do something, politicians say, mañana. You have COP, which is, I think, a monumental waste of time, because you get all these people coming together, recommendations happen, and then nothing really happens. What do you see as, it's $1 million question, but how would you see it now in terms of going forward?
Well, thanks for the easy question, I think one of the important elements is to be aware of the fact that people measure suggested changes against the status quo. And every kind of change is involving a psychological cost, and so there is a kind of aversion. I think what we need to do very urgently is to make very tangible the cost of inaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. See,
Can
you did
I-
have an
can I
answer.
just also- yeah.
Okay, very briefly, because I want to bring back people, the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted, it struck me how this debate, in a way, resembles the process that we had with these three distinct lenses, because we immediately start splitting, you know, environment from another priority, another idea, another problem. What we need to be doing is to actually realize that there is this environment element in everything, in all these ideas like fairness, redistribution, security, and speak in this kind of like, nexus way. Otherwise, there will always be this kind of splitting oil and water debate where we kind of lose on
Yeah, but Vadim, the point is that politicians don't get it. They're not going to speak in the terms that you're speaking.
I think I beg to differ. I think they do get it, for example, on climate change. We don't have that many outright deniers of climate change. I think that it's sort of like become normalized and internalized that there is climate change, it's anthropogenic, and it's affected. It's been affected by certain practices, economic practices, social, and so on. We don't have that understanding on the environment yet. We don't understand.
Sorry, I'm challenging you. We've got the Secretary General of the Greens who said that they became persona non grata. They became the enemy politically because they were promoting an agenda people saw as being too costly, not real, and not relevant anymore.
That's because how party debate, how party politics is organized.
Sure. Okay.
Issue-based.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Lady here, you've been patient.
Oh, yeah. I can be more if you want to.
Sorry?
I can be more patient if you want to go on with the program.
I can do if you want to give up your time.
No, I'm Nicole Dewan. I just stepped out of the commission in April. I'm now with ULB as a researcher. My question is about the words that we are using and the extent to which you insisted on narrative. Polycrisis seems to say this falls out of nowhere on us, and to hide to some extent the factor of the polycrisis that originates in past policies. And so I think that indeed it comes to the enlarged thinking that you were calling for, and also the same with the theme that we know will be now to the foreground: competitiveness, security, fairness. It's not just to say that we need to have an environment to be fair or secure, but how can you call on changing the meaning we put in these words? What do we mean by competitiveness? Because I feel that because of the saturation of the issue that is around us, and policymakers alike, we tend to not think but react with sort of quick and misleading thinking that does not lead to any perspective of the future.
Absolutely.
Not anyone. So I think that we should be collectively aware of this reactiveness and see how we can open the box of thinking further, how we can change the meaning of the word we use, or even change the word themselves, so that we can open a future perspective.
But we all need to do that collectively, don't we? Because our institutional governance and institutional structures since the 40s...
It's dangerous to ask a question because you send the question.
I know, I do. No, but I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm just saying, I think for all of us, we have to remember that some of the institutional infrastructure that was created since the 40s, let's say, or even before, is about the here and now. It's not about foresight. It's about dealing with problems now. So there's a kind of an inertia built in.
But being meaningful in the here and now, because the problem sometimes is we take our wish and our words and our goal for reality. And that, well, it's about putting, for example, proportionality. Sometimes we acknowledge a challenge, but we don't manage to put the solution and policy that will be up to the size of the challenge.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to both of you in a moment. Just give me a moment. We've got a question on Slido, so we've got people watching and listening online. So, Ryan.
Yes, many thanks for the questions online. I'll just pick a couple. The first one is from the UK. She asked, could you please touch on the cost, i.e. cost of taking versus not taking action? The type of cost, are we talking economic, health, social, environment, etc.? Another question is on the green transition. The person asked whether it can work as Europe, contrary to China, does not secure an independent raw material supply, such as rare earth materials, silicon, etc. And the last one, to go back to the messages and the green messages in particular, somebody makes the point that they're felt too often too far away from normal daily life, and perhaps we should try to be more pragmatic and not phrase it as a plus, but rather something integral to the politics we need to do.
Excellent, very informed questions. I like that. Well, all very, very good. Gentlemen, you at the back there, and you're the last I will take, and then we'll go back to both of you, and then get on to the next section of our excellent debate. Sir,
thank you very much.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Laurent Bontou. I work at the EU Policy Lab at the GRC in the Commission. And I was one of the people behind last year's Foresight report on the sustainability transition that fed the strategic foresight report of the Commission in 2023. I just wanted to rebound on what Nicole just said. And I think that, one of the things that emerges from all the comments we've heard is that presentism is very strong. So the focus of politicians in particular on the here and now and responding immediately to what's happening in the real, in real life and in real time without really thinking about the long term. That's why I think that this type of foresight work is extremely important, because in order to get out of this or over presentism, we have to spend time working on future visions. And we don't spend enough time doing this. So foresight processes like the one we did last year or this one now, are very, useful, and they present possible futures, in diverse, but we need to go one step beyond and then start to create large debates about, okay, considering what could happen, we have to decide what we want our own future to be, to re-empower the European Union in particular, to chart a course towards a sustainable future in which we take decisions on what trade-offs we're ready to take and what not, and where our priorities are. And that would be very useful to feed the political debate away from what we are seeing now, which is becoming a mess, where there's extreme levels of polarization.
No, indeed, but just keep the mic for a second. Isn't one of the biggest issues that we failed in doing is taking people with us?
Yep.
Really. And how do we get that right? Because when you think about it, imagine you're in, let's say down by Anderlecht or Molenbeek or wherever we're talking about in terms of poorer parts of Saint-Gilles, where you've got crap housing, you're making a decision between fuel or food, you've got really crap public services, and you're thinking, why are you talking about visioning my future when actually my present is just so nasty?
But
it's a difficult question, I know.
Visioning can help people create a positive vision of the future. That's what is important. And therefore, you can start to discuss about how to get to a situation which is better than today's. That's the whole point. So yes, we can do foresight, we can make plenty of scenarios, and then each scenario will have its own trade-offs and advantages, disadvantages, whatever. And this is all nice and well, but it doesn't chart a course yet. So it's a prerequisite to help people think that the future is more open than they think. Yeah. Because very often politicians are also like that. They tend to react on what they know from the past, the tried and tested methods.
Sure.
But with such a fast-changing world as we have today, that doesn't work anymore. We can see that. People still are caught up by surprises.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to be able to actually project ourselves in an open future to really catch back the control over the agenda to move towards a positive future.
But I think, one of the things that we really dramatically need to do is think about how we rethink community engagement. Yeah. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I think we really need to reimagine that.
Yes, absolutely.
You want it to be 60 seconds only, because I really need to move on, because my colleagues will just tell me, they'll shoot me and say, stop it.
Yeah, so related to that, well, I'm Amy Aguilar. I'm from the Hot or Cool Institute. And I would like to highlight that I do think that foresight is super valuable, but I think the other very important thing that this report brings is a systemic perspective. Because I think that's the complement. Yes, we need to envision different futures, but we need to understand why the systems that we have are taking us by design to the results that we have and not to the results that we want. And what do we need to change in the systems, and how do we transform these systems? Because I think what we have been doing is optimizing systems, and just by doing that, that's where we price out a lot of people, because we just want them to change their behavior in the existing system that is unsustainable by design. And I think there is a value in bringing these to the narratives as well, because once we are no longer on the parts and we're on the systems, we can start saying this is not not a story about individual change collectively doing the job, but it's about how do we go about that infrastructure, the interactions between infrastructure and policy and imaginaries and so on of the status quo. And then it's a story about societal change.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things I'm thinking is I wish that, we're recording this, visually, and then playing it to the new batch of MEPs and say this is a conversation you should be having. So, Lorenzo and Vadim, over to you to address some of these issues around, I think, the cost. Did you look at it in terms of a cost impact assessment? That question about how do you take people with you in terms of the transition? Have we kind of missed a point there, as we were hearing? And the kind of, I suppose, the sense of, will the security dimension really work in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, maybe I can start from the taking the people with us part, which I very much agree with, and I think we made some substantial effort in the report to highlight. I mean, I think overall we can reflect in terms of what sustainability governance means when we acknowledge this, and in essence it means not just looking at the outcomes, but also at the process. So that's also part of sustainability, intrinsic part of it. I think a lot of the discussions and action that has been taken has been justified and informed by a logic that builds only on focus on the outcomes rather than on the process itself. And the process is what brings the different perspectives together and what brings people together and what actually embodies sustainability from a societal perspective, and that's what we're really suffering from in Europe, I think, and also speaks to a broader issue of democracy. So I think there's something there in the way we engage with citizens, in the way we engage with communities, and the way we conceptualize sustainability in itself. So it needs to be an integral part of it under the polycrisis context. And on the costs, maybe, of course, there are several estimates, and most of the studies suggest that preventing some of these costs will be, some of the impacts will be cost effective. But I also like to raise a question in this. I mean, what is the cost of something, of several catastrophes that cannot even be projected or predicted? I mean, I think we are facing very different type of comparing different types of numbers here when we compare the costs of investing today and the costs in the future. They're very much uncertain, but we need to be on the precautionary side because we know by a fact that actually we are not as good as we thought we were in predicting and projecting some of the major and fundamental changes in our climate system, and we have to be prepared for that. So, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, but I mean, that's fine. But an economist can do the job and say to you, when you think of the past 5 years, what the bug cost us, what the droughts have cost us in Europe, what the flooding has cost us in Europe, and the outages, there's a cost to that. That's easily analysed. And I think, we have to, in this conversation, we need to get sharper because saying the nice, wise words aren't going to take us forward. We need to be able to be as strong in saying there's an economic analysis in this which says to you, if you don't do it, your GDP or the way your public debt is just going to get higher. So you come in on that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that this question, two questions about the costs and the discussions are often removed from the daily life of citizens,
yes, right, yeah.
come from the same person. And I think maybe there is a problem there, that the discussion about the costs is not really seriously part of that democratic debate. And on Nicole, you said that we need to broaden these lenses and meanings. That's what the report is doing. But if you go outside the report, very quickly, you kind of reach the difficult questions of power in the kind of Foucauldian sense, the power over meanings. Who defines these meanings? Who has the say on that? And that is a question of democracy. So environment and democracy and sustainability, they are really have to be linked in the kind of one language. We need to create that language, and that has to be a kind of language of new democratic change. And I think that goes into the last point from you, that that is a discussion about Europe's future. And this is what I meant when I said that sustainability is should be part of Europe's story. And that debate should continue beyond, of course, the report.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you both. You generated quite a healthy conversation and debate. It's not over, obviously. We have another 2 sections to go. But thank you for engaging also. So whilst I do a quick changeover, would you please come up for me? That'll be great. Alexandra and Claire. Now, as we do that, the gentleman there, you are stretching out there, like desperately trying to catch my attention. Can you just give the mic whilst we do this swap over? What were you desperate to say?
Thank you so much, Dharmendra. I just wanted to point...
Introduce yourself.
Yes. Reza Zain Jofrali.
Yes.
I used to be a lawyer. I have 5 law degrees, but I've moved on to better things. I'm an impact entrepreneur in the space sector. I've got a space startup backed by the Ministry of Economy in Luxembourg. So coming back to what the gentleman was saying, you can have sort of evaluation of cost, and let's talk about migrants. According to Zurich Insurance Group, by 2050 there will be 1.2 billion climate migrants, climate refugees. And right now in 2023, if you're talking about migrants coming to Europe, there was a little bit more than 400,000 migrants coming to Europe, and it's already causing a mess. So this actually brings environment not as a side issue, because it was sidelined as a side issue for generations. Okay. But in fact, it's very, very much a center issue, and it's an existential issue to the future of the human race. But the big problem, the Cornelian dilemma right now, is that we've got, at least in Western democracies, a political system that is geared towards very, very short-term mandate preservation as opposed to making long-term disruptive changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for bringing that. That point has been missing in the debate so far. Thank you for bringing that in. Thank you all for joining us. So Claire, I'm going to start with you, if I may. It's a toughie because we've been touching on this, the question about social equity, fairness, and the kind of narrative that needs to change. From your perspective, what do we need to do? What do we need to do differently in the context of what you see as the biggest challenges in the next 5 years?
Thank you very much. A lot of actually the points that I wanted to raise have already been raised in the discussion, so this is really quite rich, and I have to kind of think a little bit about what I need to emphasize. But I think part of the work that I do, so I research governance and a lot of studies on democracy. And of course, for the last, say, 15, 20 years, we've been in the research community talking about, is our democracy in crisis? And if you look at it, actually, it's probably not. So even though we see a situation of polarization, populism rise, those are kind of symptoms of the fact that democracy is working because our citizens are expressing their opinions. However, our current democratic system has 2 inherent weaknesses to it that we haven't been paying sufficient attention to. And one is the episodic participation. And the second is the fact that we have not very transparent bureaucracies managing day-to-day policy making. And if you only have participation from all citizens every 4 or 5 years, that means that is their only opportunity to express a frustration. So one of the things I really liked about the report was that there was this emphasis on the social aspect, on the participative mechanisms, on how governance and democratic governance needs to improve. And I would argue it's not necessarily change, but it's a strengthening of the democratic processes that we anyway have that need to be further emphasized. So the idea of anchoring long-term objectives into short-term policy making can be bolstered by stronger citizen participation. We have a lot of good examples across Europe of how strong and meaningful citizen participation outside of the normal electoral processes actually brings very meaningful discussions with citizens and brings policy recommendations from those citizens that usually go beyond what the politicians feel they have the capacity to propose. So citizens themselves understand the complexity, recognize it. They don't necessarily want just one, they don't have one priority at any time, which unfortunately a lot of our politicians think this is now our priority, but citizens have multiple priorities. If the only opportunity for them to express their frustration or the dissatisfaction is through voting, that complexity does not come into our policy system. It is not expressed. So for me, the renewal of our democratic systems is going to be a very important objective for the next 5 years. And that will be something that will require serious engagement, I think, I would like to say, from our political system, but probably a lot of it will come from research community and civil society organizations too, if that was the sort of objective that they could get to. The other thing that I think I just want to bring out is, in reaction to your question there, is this idea of trade-offs and winners and losers that we've been talking about in the previous discussion, connecting that to the themes of security, competitiveness, fairness. I think what's very interesting is that the winners of our current system for too long have had too much power and too much influence in our system. And so, again, we need those whose voices have not been heard, and this is also something that a lot of research has looked at for decades. It's not a new idea, that we need to create spaces where those voices who are not usually able to access the system and who are the losers of the current system, so those people who you were speaking about who have poor housing, those are the current losers. And they don't have the opportunity to express themselves, and their voice is not as strong and powerful. So the meaning of words like fairness for somebody sitting in a poor housing situation who has to choose between heating and eating is very different. That's a different sort of fairness to the person who wants to take their private jet. And for them, fairness is different. I want to fly my private jet as often as I want. So you have, but who holds the power in that conversation is also a very important aspect. And that's the indication of our democracy not being in crisis, but that the aspects of it that need to be strengthened, having a bit of a weakness, is the fact that those voices do not have the opportunity to speak. And I think the whole context of this polycrisis situation reveals or kind of lays those inherent, say, weaknesses of a democratic system far more lays it bare. But that doesn't mean that we cannot deal with them.
No.
And doesn't mean that it is a lost cause.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you. But that point is, how do we move from the episodic to the annual or the current? You know, because you see, I mean, when you look at it and you get the age that I do, you think, God, these buggers are out again, talking really kind of joyously about, I want your vote, I'll change your life, I'm going to do this, and everyone gets excited, and all the policy community and think tanks get very excited about saying, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then we all take a deep breath, and then we wait another 4 years and think, why? You know, and sometimes you need to perhaps the tectonic plates underpinning that democratic structure needs to change, but it's about who can actually poke the bear in the eye and say, change, because that's actually what is needed. We did something, so on your tables you'll see this card. We spoke to 2,024 citizens last year in 7 key markets in Europe, and it was fascinating that, you know, a lot of them believed that the solutions on climate action are there, they just don't trust politicians to do the job. They were more scared about the impact on their stability and security because of climate than they were about the war and the war that's going on in our neighborhood. And I thought it was quite fascinating that, you know, at the end of the day, we have an intelligent community on the ground. They just don't, and they were saying that they think the institutions are right, but they don't trust the people in them to make the right decisions, which are not to be vested. So it's just, you know, we're running these again, so but I do encourage you to read that. So it speaks to your point very well. Thank you very much. Alexander, you know, you're a nice bookend to this conversation because you're a chief economist. So, chief economist, do you hear that? So he can tell us a little bit about what kind of economic policies do we need to put in place to tackle the issue of both the security, transitions, and what, you know, you hear so many politicians say that, you know, tackling climate action, whether it's in international trade or in the marketplace, cannot be in sync with what we do on competition, for example, or climate action. So they're both, it's an and/or, it's not a and. To you.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, you will not be surprised that I say that there is actually end between the two. It really depends on what you understand also on the competitiveness, right? And I think here the report from EEA was very good. If you present this as an ability of a country to produce high levels of well-being for its population in a sustainable manner, then it's also very much consistent with economic policies that are aimed at boosting the capacity of your economy. Now, let me comment now, first on the approach to policymaking, and I think this is also where the report is very important, because we are living in this polycrisis world, which some people actually called permacrisis world. So not only that we are dealing with many crises, but we're bound to face permanent crisis in the future, and this has somehow overwhelmed the policymaking system. I mean, we were not just ready for making so many decisions at the same time. I sometimes tend to think about this in terms of this fast and slow thinking by Daniel Kahneman. I mean, we were constantly locked in the fast thinking mode and not able to move into the long run, more deliberate, more visionary type of thinking. We in DG R&I, together with a group of experts, we also try to contribute to this and then came up with a paradigm to protect, prepare, and transform. Protect in the short run, you're hit by crisis, so of course you need to react. You need to somehow provide protection to those who are affected by that, but also you have to prepare for the future crises which are coming, while keeping an eye on the long run objective, which is the socio-economic transformation that we have been talking about. So it's a nice framework. Of course, in practice this is much more difficult to implement, but I think it is worth bringing it back again and again, so that the policymakers have this North Star somewhere, and then they can anchor policies which go in that direction. Now, on the economic policy agenda, I will not lay out a fully fledged economic policy agenda for following years, but when you think about this, there are some points which kind of sticking points which bring things together, and that's investments and capacity building. Right? So on the one hand, we know that we need to transform big parts of our economy, which will require huge investments. In this respect, one also needs to bear in mind that some of these investments, at least in the short run, will not be necessarily productive or more productive than the capital that we have in place currently. Because that means bringing new technologies before they will become competitive, and they can become competitive. You just look at the solar, the wind, at the very beginning. The prices were very high. Now they're cheaper than the alternative, than alternatives, right? So this can happen, but it can take time. So one needs to be patient and then also explain in this respect. So we should be explicit, and then this was mentioned several times already, also about possible trade-offs. I mean, we cannot have everything immediately, but we need to communicate about these possible short-run costs against the benefits which will be substantial and which will come in the future. Another element is capacity building, and then these are kind of no-regret policies, but we are not doing necessarily that much progress there. You will not be surprised, since I come from DG Research and Innovation. We're not investing enough in research and innovation and in technological capacities in Europe. If you look at where we stand compared to other parts of the world, like US or China, we are lagging very much behind digital technologies, and these are transversal technologies which can also help us with the transitions towards, well, not only the green transition, but also towards a greener and more sustainable future. So this is something where we need to make progress. At the same time, where Europe does rather well currently is the green tech. Clean technologies. I mean, if you look at, if you count patents or look at the capacities which are in Europe, we have still quite important comparative advantage. That is shrinking if you look at the investments and efforts which are made, in particular in China, but also elsewhere. So this is something which we should retain, build on, and then this can also be a nice business case for the future. So again, here you see some synergy between increasing competitiveness, but also pursuing our other objectives, and not only the green objectives. Also, moving on this front will help us improve our security, right? By reducing also reliance on raw materials and so on and so forth. So these are elements which are very important, which should be there. And I'll stop here, is of course skills. I I mean, we haven't really discussed this. We often like to say that Europe is unique in the sense we have a very well-educated workforce, and this is the case indeed. But when you look already now at skill shortages which are out there, they concern around 14% of the workforce. Now, in the future, things are bound to get much worse. Population and working age population will be shrinking, whilst requirements on skills in the population will be increasing, including, for example, as regards green skills. I mean, we often like to speak about STEM, scientific, mathematics, and other skills, but tend to forget the transversal skills, more social skills, but also importantly for green skills. So this is something that we also should pay attention to and somehow embed in our policies in the future.
Sure. I mean, you make me think about and reflect that, we're living in societally like cognitive dissonance, in the sense that how can you make sure that you understand, you see the world around you, you know what the solutions are, people aren't taking actions, but it gets us getting worse. And what we do know is that if you invest in R&D, things can be better. Well, you cited China and the States, but you look at Japan. The percentage of R&D spending of GDPR is so much higher, 4% higher in each of those countries than it is in Europe. And you can see, as a result, the growth trajectory. How do you, in terms of your policy book agenda for the new mandate, are you saying up it, the percentage of R&D spend?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a tricky question. You probably know we have this long-run objective of 3% spending on research and development. This target was set, I think, in 2001.
Dear me,
now,
foolish and hard.
Two decades later, we're at 2.23, if I'm not mistaken. So we're very, very far. We have made some improvements, but the gap is huge. Now, the issue is that a big part of this gap comes from private spending. So this is not that you would just ask governments to increase budgets on R&D. In some countries, this obviously should be done because they're desperately low. But overall, we need to create an environment for businesses to invest. And this is also partially linked to the issue of digital sectors. So this is what I mentioned previously. This is where we lag behind. So if you compare for US and EU, the biggest difference in R&D spending comes from the digital sectors, from biotech and so forth.
I know, but the US, come on, they the legislation that's kind of pouring money, loads of money into innovation. But when you think about it, three very ideologically different states, China, Japan, and the US, get it. They're double the figures of we are. They're double the figures of R&D spend from the public sector. And it's just that, how do you change that mindset, which I'm not going to ask you to answer. But the cost issue absolutely needs to be addressed. And I think that it will be good to know. I want to open it up again to you, again, to make a response or share your thoughts in the next 10 minutes or so in terms of what you've heard, both from the kind of democratic and institutional change need, and how do you make people, or enable people to come with you, and then the kind of economic stance that we're taking. And I would like to hear from some of the young ones in the room, because we've had a certain demographic contributing. No, you would have had a bite. I will bring you, I promise, but I can see some young faces that are now looking away from me and looking down. I consider you young. Can you say something? Will you contribute? Or if you're too shy, don't worry.
No, I had a question, but more on the discussion that we were having.
You can do that too. Don't worry. Introduce yourself.
Hi, hello. My name is Jessica Four. I work for Danone, so private sector.
Good.
I don't have the response to your question just now, so I won't do that. No, I had a question on the cost that we were mentioning earlier, and the cost of inaction being more expensive than the cost of actually doing climate action. I wanted, especially for the food sector, by the way, I wanted to ask, because Lina at the very beginning said that we need to align public and private investments towards the transitions in general. How do we do that? Do you have any recommendations for both policymakers that are new here, but also for business as well? How do we align that and work together on that?
Very good question. Anybody? Great. Lady there in the white jumper.
Yes, very interesting discussion. Noelani from Climate Alliance, the largest city network. Just a few things on the democracy side of things. When we have someone like Bloomberg calling Sefcovic privately billionaire from the United States, who's then privately setting agendas for if he gets reelected, versus all of the cities that are trying to implement those skills and capacity building in order to make the Green Deal actually happen after we've done all of our great policy work. I don't really know where the democracy sits in Europe if we can have the billionaires of the world make phone calls and get our politicians in the bag. The other thing, too, is a study by Energy Cities and our sister found out that we need 500,000 people to be working in small towns and cities where more than 45% of Europe's population actually lives. Exactly. And if you're just a mayor and you have 2 assistants trying to run a place, how are you supposed to put those climate and energy and environmental policies on the ground? People don't have the time, and there's not enough sexiness to the job of sitting in some town somewhere where you need a climate practitioner to make that happen. The other thing, too, is that in a meeting with the Secretary SecGen the other day, they said, well, it's really hard for us to open up the public procurement directive to have some more climate criteria, because every time these things go to bid for competitiveness, the cheapest tender wins. So it's all very fine to have these big meta ideas, but when you actually have to get the job done, I think we have a few questions to answer still.
No, indeed, and you're quite. I mean, it's nonsense that you can't tamper with the criteria for public procurement. It's been done, and it's been shown that you can do it. I mean, look what happened in terms of COVID. If that was not the biggest example of pushing aside state aid, what was? So, but cities have always been. I mean, in our view, as a think tank, is that cities have always been the drivers of change. You have done things in an amazing way locally, but you've also connected across the world. Bloomberg's helped with that. Others have helped with that. Like the C40's agenda. Is there a sense of hopelessness at the moment amongst your peer group in terms of your alliance? Is there still a sense of hope?
Hope is not really maybe the adjective here. It's there's a real desire to get things done and to not just now all talk about security and sort of big meta things and have a militarized Europe and all that. We'd like to actually just do what we've been doing for the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. We're happy with, we can take this. It's okay for the Green Deal to be a prosperity agenda. Everybody wants to have a good life, so it doesn't have to be an either or. I mean, there's a win-win for energy savings and energy efficiency for everyone. It's not about, for energy poverty and all of the different levels of things that need to be addressed. I think that there's a sense of let's do it now, but don't forget us and change the agenda and run off on some new tangent just because it's I like the Can Europe had the slogan, new parliament, same planet.
Love it.
Thanks.
Absolutely love it. No, but cities have been the drivers of change. It's where most of the GDP lies in most nations. And you as mayors have been doing some dramatic things and almost cut across the political differences. And I just hope that continues, because there are saving grace, if you like, to a certain extent. Who else wanted to come in? We've got a Slido and the gentleman there. So let's take the Slido first. Ryan?
So it's a question from somebody from the International Baby Food Action Network, who, rather than focusing on labeling for green products, suggest that the trade rules covering harmful, wasteful, and plastic packaged ultra-processed products should be considered. The EU is a key player in Codex and could push for a ban on promotion of these products.
Very good questions online. Gosh, and what interesting, thoughtful views. Gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Peter Bocek. I'm with the European chemical industry, and I'm in this business since the previous century. So I have seen a lot of commissions coming and going, a lot of strategies, and Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, she started her term by promising a man on the moon moment for the Europeans with her Green Deal. The elections now tell a different story. So it has not really been well perceived or understood by the general public, it seems. And what I ask the experts there is, do we really look enough at the role of Europe in the world? Because when we talk about competitiveness, access to raw materials, access to energy that should be competitive, all this, I am afraid all this talk about the cost of inaction does not really look at the effectiveness of what we can achieve realistically in Europe. Because we have maybe 7% of global emissions, and we cannot promise our citizens, well, if we do not act, all these bad things will happen. But we have to be honest, if we do half of it, maybe even still all these negative effects will happen anyhow. So there should be some honesty and also some modesty in the debate when we look at the European role in the whole world.
Mm-hmm. And what would you like it to be? When you say honesty and humility, what does that mean?
I believe we have to do a proper calculation of our size, of our importance. We sometimes believe we have seen the right, we can tell the world where to go and what to do, and that's not what is happening in the world. The world is going elsewhere, and we seem to be left a little bit behind.
Absolutely. I mean, if you speak to a bunch of African ambassadors, they'll tell you straight how they feel about how the EU is negotiating or being didactic about you forego the pleasures that we have and then just do the right thing now. It's that. And you see that in Indonesia, you see that in Malaysia and elsewhere. It's a real kind of discourse that's out there writ large. There was the gentleman here in the blue shirt. So I'm trying to go for people who haven't spoken.
Now the microphones come from both sides. Yeah, thanks a lot. Even though I'm not part of the young generation anymore.
It's okay. We're all valid. It's just I want to make sure there's variable, voices in the room. Please introduce yourself.
Great. Yeah, my name is Manfred Rosenstock. I work for the European Commission, DG Environment. I'm in the science unit, if you want. We call ourselves the Green Knowledge Hub, and we're doing foresight studies as well, one a year. So thanks for the contributions and for the discussion so far. Thanks a lot. I have two questions to Claire, actually. I find it logical to say that participation of citizens is not continuous enough, and I'm wondering how you want to make that more continuous. I've seen presentations about initiatives at local or very low size regional levels, like the German-speaking community in Belgium. And I wonder whether it's not much easier at that level or whether you can actually transpose that to the national levels. And the second question is, you said that the current system favors the interests of the winners, and the winners participate. Sounds right, but how do you motivate the losers to participate more in the future? Thank you.
Big, tough questions, which I don't think they can answer. It was all of us need to think about and answer. Lady at the back there. Hey.
Hi, thank you. My name is Liv Heinrich. I said this last time I was here. I represent myself, which means I'm not employed. I have a question also for Claire, mainly, I guess. So there are some groups that are engaged in climate and environmental action, like the Extinction Rebellion or the Last Generation, but many politicians label them as terrorists for what they do, and they are the only, I would say, disruptive and continuously protesting groups. So why is that? And why is environmental protest such a non-mainstream topic all of a sudden?
What do you think about that as representative of yourself?
I think it's...
Why do you think it's become? Because when you look at, if you look at the UK or France or elsewhere, legislation has been created to kind of say, we want to curtail the excesses of people sticking themselves and gluing themselves to airplanes or buses or tarmac. But from your perspective?
I mean, one thing is protests are meant to be disruptive, and they're meant to be annoying. Of course, we don't want to be annoyed by them, but this is what they're supposed to do. And then the other thing is, I think, if we, what these groups are demanding is a change of the system and a change of priorities from profit to sustainability, which is mainly, and like, I've been also told as a younger person that, like me wanting sustainability means I will not have a second Porsche when I'm 50, even though I've never even considered this option. But I think maybe there's a complete misunderstanding between what older generations consider growth and what we consider growth or what we consider long-term goals of ours.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's a demand of change of, living in a post-capitalist society to something different, something more long-term.
Absolutely. I mean, where we're living at the moment, there is this kind of dramatic tension intergenerationally. You can see it. It's only going to get sharper when we think about it, especially the generation that's literally growing up on that. And they're behind us. Very different psychology. But it's interesting. The right of assembly is enshrined in the actual elements of the European Union. Yet imagine truckers and farmers can get more traction than those who stick themselves to tarmac, and that says a lot about the politics of where we are. Claire, a bunch of tough questions. I mean, if you want to kind of reflect generally in terms of these issues about activation, moving away from a different kind of episodic thing, where do we make sure we find those moments where people can engage?
I think maybe I'll work backwards. Yeah. This idea about the protests and the groups that are engaged. I think if we think about what is required for sustainability is indeed a transformation. And I think what these groups probably understand better than the current political ruling class is that the transformation is happening, it's coming, it's inevitable. And either we manage it by changing certain rules of society, by changing certain systemic practices, or we suffer it through the impacts of climate degradation, environmental breakdown, the breakdown of the ecological foundations upon which our society is built. And that is a message that maybe is known in a kind of a data knowledge point, but less integrated into a knowledge system. And where some of these groups, these protest groups, really have integrated that into their view of the world, that this transformation is coming and it could be catastrophic if we do not deal with it. Whereas maybe the political ruling classes have a more incremental understanding of how we can get to a more sustainable way of living, a more sustainable society, without really dealing with the potential catastrophic aspects of it. So I actually think that when it comes to sustainability, the points of difference are not necessarily generational. It's more about worldviews. So I come across a lot of young people. I'm a university professor. I teach 19 and 20-year-olds whose vision for their future is a well-paid job, 2 cars, and a second home by the beach. That's not a generational, you can't really say this is generational. It's about the worldview that is established within whatever context they're in. So I think you can have a different worldview that you have to develop in however that happens in a...
But can I just challenge you a moment? That you're talking about the top 5% to get into university globally, right? We're talking about middle-class kids in the main. We're not talking about those who haven't got jobs or are living in poor communities.
Nope.
Do you think that there isn't a difference there in the sense that they're more thinking about, I want what they have, I do want that car, but they have a very different kind of context.
Yeah, and this is also why these groups often face this backlash, because they're promoting a sort of future that excludes the possibility of 2 cars, a second home, which is what a lot of people aspire to, because that's what they see as the value of success. So I think there's a lot of real different sort of educational understanding of what's good in the world, and some have a new understanding and others do not. And the fact is that we're at this point where the transformation is happening, and it can tip in one way or the other depending on how we manage it. And I think that's also part of this is why the better participation of the losers, as we mentioned, from our current system is very important. So when it comes to these participative processes, we do have quite some good examples at national level as well. So we've seen citizens' assembly processes happening in many countries. In Ireland, there's quite a long history of working in citizens' assemblies, and they're generally quite meaningful and can have impact. We have also in France, we have in Luxembourg, I think we have in many other countries, in Germany at certain lender levels. So there are, at a higher scale, you do have these processes as well, and they can be very meaningful. We've also had the European efforts, the conference
on the future of Europe. What did you make of that, by the way? Do you think it was just a sham?
So I think the European Union itself doesn't have the tools to reach its citizens. It relies too heavily on the member states. And if you have member state governments who are not interested in advancing the advantages of being a part of a European Union, then it's harder for the EU to reach its own citizens. It doesn't have the resources or the tools or the mechanisms or the usual avenues to do that. The European elections in too many countries are still kind of national campaigns as opposed to European campaigns.
Millions of euros were spent on creating a kind of a digital infrastructure and a process of engaging citizens. And I mean, wouldn't it be a shame just that just all goes by the by? Why not use it? It's that point about not being episodic. Okay, we've done the Conference on the Future of Europe. Let's move on and do something else.
Yeah, it would be a shame. I agree.
Okay, thank you. And you might have views, please do share them. Adam, can I ask you to answer that question around public-private partnerships? I mean, Lena, you can come in if you want to, but I'm thinking you're the chief economist of in that Director General. We've got private sector players saying, how can we make sure, and you said the private sector needs to invest more in the R&D space. So respond to that question directly from Danon.
Yeah. Well, public funds are not here to replace basically private investments, right? So what we first and foremost should do is somehow to stimulate them and then bring them together. There are many attempts and instruments where we do it in financial markets, where through EU level instruments or at the level of member states, we try to de-risk some investments to take care of some of the market failures which are out there, and for which private firms would not invest or not invest as much as they could or should in order to somehow reach some socially optimal level. So this is what we can do on the one hand. In terms of research and innovation, the situation is even more important, right? There, knowledge, as you know, can travel very freely. So without public interventions, there would be much less investment in research and innovation than there should be. So there, the role for public authorities to invest, for example, in fundamental research are very important. But then when we see the transition between research and innovation, when we are turning ideas into something which can be then marketed, this is something where we also see some market failures.
Absolutely, China and USA scale them instead.
Exactly, where we should intervene, but always bearing in mind that we want to leverage the private investments.
Can you think of, I'm not sure how long you've been in the Commission, can you think of any example where you've had the private sector player come in alongside you at the beginning on an R&D approach, i.e. co-invest directly at the beginning?
Sorry, can you?
So imagine you want to do, you've got the next phase of, let's say you want to do on green technologies, and you want to do a bit of research and innovation in there, and you're going to put 100 million. Is there or let's say that's 50 million or 20 million even. Have you had a situation where a private sector player said, I'll match that 20 million with 20 million?
Well, this is also the principle of the public-private partnerships, which we have, for example, under the Horizon Europe. So there you have associations or groups of industries together with public authorities, where each partner contributes. Okay. Right, and of course it's a discussion of how much each comes in with, but in principle these are potentially instruments which have the highest leverage.
Sure.
So there you can indeed induce quite important private.
No, indeed. I mean, but I'm not sure how many of you know the Horizon program. When you think about it in its totality, it's the largest R&D program in the world. You know, it's Europe. It's so bad at communicating its successes, but also getting the private sector play. That was a cheeky question of mine because I know it is difficult to get that. But that's what we are promoting. So those of you who you've got a little card on your table. That's this report. It's our 10 policy choices for the new mandate. In one of them, we say, treat the private sector differently. So this is a direct answer to your question. We say the private sector should be seen as a shareholder in creating a good society. And so therefore we use this awful term that the private sector should be upstream, right upstream in problem solving, rather than a contractor or seen through the lens of a market maker, but actually further up in problem solving. So have a look at policy. I can't remember the number of the policy choice, but it's one of them in there. But I encourage you to look at that. Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to now move on to the next and final stage. Ira, I would like you, if you may, I know you've got, I want you to say a little bit about the policy challenges and that debate that we constantly have about creating ecological resilience, competitiveness, and all of that. But that question on Slido that we had, can you answer that directly about, you know, should we not be using our muscle, market muscle, or a policy context to really show that the packaging and the plastic and all the rest of it has a harmful effect, but then do something about it in policy terms?
Yes, indeed. Actually, I was prepared to give an overview on some of the questions that had been raised previously as well, but maybe I can start with that one. Because obviously, and this was also raised in terms of how can we align private financing with these long-term objectives that Lena had raised in her introduction. It's also a matter of politics. It's about introducing price mechanisms that give a preference to products that have less negative impacts on the environment and the climate. It's a matter of taxation. You know, we talk about environmental fiscal reform that can adjust these decisions that both the industry but also consumers take every day when they make their decisions. And when it comes to packaging, obviously, this is something that should be addressed in a way that these packages, whatever they are, whether they're bottles or cartons or other, that they can be properly recycled. In many member states, you have this system where bottles are recycled against a slight price that the consumer gets back and so on. So these carrots also can affect our daily decisions, regardless whether you are environmentally directed in your thoughts or not. As to public financing, obviously there we have a major possibility within the EU and also at national level. At EU level, we talk about the multi-annual financial framework, and here obviously, it is clear that for the next 7-year term, which is after 2027, we will need to address the climate and environmental considerations horizontally on all topics that the EU is dealing with, so that they should not at least be counter these objectives that we are discussing today. Then there was also the question regarding citizen participation and so on. I definitely share the view that Claire raised regarding the participatory mechanism and also citizens' assemblies. As you said, Claire, they are already very good examples at national level how the just transition, for instance, has been implemented. In certain countries, it hasn't worked properly. It has been imposed on those regions and industries that have to be phased out gradually. But in others, such as in Spain, for instance, the labor unions, the civil society, other stakeholders, consumer groups, and also, of course, the industry itself have been deeply involved in these discussions, have come together to look at the different aspects that need to be taken into consideration, and then drawn conclusions which have worked pretty well. Obviously, if you don't do that, if you just impose a decision that will make your livelihood at risk, then probably you will also counter very strong opposition, and that's also fodder for populist movements and so on. So I have my personal experience about working with these kind of citizens assemblies, and I know that it builds trust, understanding of the other perspectives as well, so that you're not only looking at the issue from your own perspective, but also maybe understand what are the other angles that need to be taken into consideration, and then maybe you may reach a compromise which is acceptable to everyone. I may continue as well on other topics, but if you have a question at this stage, yeah. Anyhow, there are several other issues that should be raised. I think one of the participants in the audience questioned, do we look enough at the role of EU in the world? I won't be so skeptical about that topic, but it is true that at the moment there's a risk in our trade relations with non-EU countries that we fall into the pitfall of protectionism. You may know that many countries in the global south already now consider climate as a weapon that is being used at EU level against their interests. Also, that climate is prioritized before development, and I think that should be avoided at all costs.
But how? I mean, because, you know...
Yes.
You know... So
I was going to get there.
Okay, then, fine.
Right.
No, because when you think of the recent example, you know, electric cars from China, bang, there's a huge tariff put on it. When you look at what's happening in terms of supply chains in Africa, bang, you put something else which is going to actually, especially in terms of IMF loans, the payback and the interest is so high that some of these countries just cannot actually go into a transition modality either. So we seem to kind of have this kind of international relations role that is going into kind of me first.
Yes, and here, of course, it's good to remember that the EU has free trade agreements with a wide number of countries, also strategic partnerships with at least a dozen countries that are providers of these critical raw materials and other commodities that the EU is importing every year. I would definitely speak in favor of maintaining constructive relations with these countries by complementing these trade agreements and other cooperation agreements with new provisions that would provide them technical but also financial support that would allow them to address many of the concerns that we have on the green transition, including also water scarcity, biodiversity, and other governance issues.
Absolutely. I mean, because when you, I agree with you, but I think it's how do you get, it's what some of you have been saying, but you said also, Alexandra, about the kind of protect, prepare, and transform, is that our international relations, our trade relations, and everything is about the here and now, and not realizing that water scarcity is on our backs within the next year or so. It's going to, by all indicators, water is going to become short for all of us. They're already in bits of Europe. There are times which you can turn on the tap and times you can't. That's the reality. And so we have to be really alive to the fact that the whole issue of climate change is borderless, regardless of politics. And so, whilst you might be feared of, let's say, bits of Africa, China, and bits of America, you need to be thinking, actually, the technology that's developing in China and India and bits of Africa could be brought to bear as a kind of global emergency. But we don't have that kind of conversation. And I'm saying the stating the bloody obvious.
Yeah. Right. I would still want to raise one further issue because it was also raised here. We should get more concrete, as you said, about the costs of inaction. And here I would take as an example the current Common Agricultural Policy. This needs to be reformed. We need to prepare a comprehensive reform that would not only ensure, of course, food security in the future, but also address the social and economic challenges of the farmers that they are facing if a major change is happening in these policies. And of course, on top of that, take into consideration these horizontal things that we have discussed today. This would require, of course, the sufficient support and required capital for upfront investments for their needs, because there's a major transformation going to happen, most probably in the next few years, if we intend to maintain the production at the level that we wish, but also secure these environmental and climate concerns. And then what comes to the external costs of farming, I recently read a report, and these are documents that can be available also easily from the scientific community. There's an estimate on the external costs of farming at global level, which runs at $10 trillion per year. These are the costs caused to our health, to, of course, eutrophication, to biodiversity, to greenhouse gas emissions, and so on, which are not taken into consideration in the production. I think this is just one perfect example of the magnitude that we're facing if we don't take them into consideration properly.
But isn't that, I totally agree with you, but the narrative needs to change, because when you think about the private sector companies globally and in Europe that made more profit since COVID in the 3 years than they did in the previous decade. That's kind of big numbers, big numbers. Yet, the conversation about using some of that as a social payback is neither here or there. It's about saying, oh, you're just taxing the wealthy. Actually, it's about social investment and social payback. We don't have that narrative in policy-making terms.
No, it's true. There's a clear disconnect between people and policymakers at the moment. People, in general, do not feel the urgency necessarily in their daily lives on topics that we have been discussing today, unless there are these environmental catastrophes that take place already in several parts of Europe. I understand that in Slovenia, in Germany, massive floods have caused major economic distress in those countries, reducing their national GDP with several percentage points. These are issues that should be taken into consideration also by policymakers. I think that the green transition, the need for it, needs to be explained better by all of us, but also the policymakers, that these are issues that need, they have an impact on also the national economies, on their decisions, and thereby it's not an unnecessary investment that needs to be done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. The hand is up straight away. But I've got a gentleman who's been so patient, and I really want to hear from him, because I'm going to ask him a really tough question. But can you wait after Giorgio's spoken? Thank you very much. Giorgio, come to you, last but not least. You're from Plan A, a very well-known organization. How do you leverage digital and green tech approaches and innovations and that capability, and make sure that we're able to leverage it to create a more, the sustainability agenda, whilst being competitive and not getting societal pushback?
Great question, thank you. And for those of you in the room who don't know perhaps who Plan A are, we're a software solution provider. We provide a software solution end-to-end that helps corporate clients understand their carbon emissions, create targets, and decarbonize. And I head up the science team, and I have the privilege to work with scientists, life cycle assessment assessors, decarbonization specialists, and actually developers to help companies make sustainable choices. And perhaps as a scientist, you might expect for me to bulldoze you with statistics, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you a story of two women. And I think it's a really important story because I want to bring this conversation and make it really tangible. So the story of these two women, one lives in Lebanon, the other one lives in Paris. So the one that lives in Lebanon started a business that makes bags. So actually what she did is start a social movement because she employed other women who were ex-prisoners, underprivileged women, and actually some of them were unfairly put in prison, put behind bars. So what she created is a social movement of women who create bags, usually by hand. If we fly back to Paris, what we have there is a woman who's a sustainability manager in one of the largest fashion companies in the world. So the fashion sustainability management lead came to Plan A and asked for advice, how can they decarbonize their supply chain? And the first thing we offered is the solution for them to understand the emissions associated with their supply chain. And the second thing that the team did is apply one of the well-known ESG rating matrices across these supply chain providers. And the end result of that was that the business that was providing them with bags, the business based in Lebanon, actually came at the bottom of the ratings in terms of sustainability credentials and metrics. The reason why they came at the bottom is because although most of their bags were made by hand, they were using diesel and kerosene to heat their buildings. And I really wanted to investigate that with the science team, and because I didn't have expertise of the energy system in Lebanon, I asked an expert that I know, her name is Emilia, who's done research on that topic, and asked, well, why are they placed bottom? You know, what's happening here? Let's investigate. And what she told me was that the energy system and the political system there is so corrupt that people don't have access to electricity. So they're actually forced to burn diesel or burn kerosene to heat their buildings. But let's fly back to Paris again. So if you're in the position of that sustainability manager and you have to take a decision about how you can decarbonize your supply chain, perhaps the easiest thing to do if you're put under pressure to make a decision quickly is to cut off that supplier, because they rank at the bottom of that, what I perceive is a flawed metric, that ESG rating that I told you about, which is a well-known one. So what we did is utilize the data and actually provide advice to the person we were working with that they shouldn't look at sustainability metrics in terms of ratings and rating their supplies, but they should look at the potential of their supplies and what they can do. And what we told them and advised them to do is actually investigate whether they can perhaps purchase or help that local business in Lebanon buy solar panels and batteries so that they become more sustainable, ultimately decarbonizing their own supply chain. So why am I telling you this story? Because...
By the way, we love it. You've got our
you.
attention. And you're not geeky. It's great.
I'm not, yeah.
No, it says that we've had a civil servant talk about the story of Europe and the need for that, and here you are, a scientist, telling us this. Anyway, I'm going to stop. Carry on. We really want the next chapter.
Thank you. I am geeky behind closed doors, but I prepared for this event. So why am I telling you this story? Because we talk about data, we talk about the importance of supply chains, but if we have flawed metrics, if we don't rely on expert advice, people are incentivized to effectively take perverse decisions. And what I believe we have a common responsibility, not only as Europeans, but as citizens of the world, to ensure that the policies that we create, that the decisions that we take, actually help create a more equitable society. So I think there's definitely an element in EU policy that should be considered, is how can we create policies that help us buy more sustainable clothes, not just so we can feel better about ourselves as Europeans, but actually, how can they lead to more equitable societies, like the example that I've just given you? And the two questions that it was a fascinating debate that I want to ask the people in the room, and we can engage further, is how can we create policy that finances and incentivizes sustainable choices reflected in the real world, not on our spreadsheets? So that's number one. And the second one is how can we truly shape policy that leads to a more equitable society? And again, not just European citizens feeling better about ourselves and the choices that we make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've kind of, last, but you kind of brought this kind of, in this conversation that has been written with kind of the challenges, barriers, the hopelessness, and the things, the terrible things about we just can't change the system. You bring forward two stories of the fact that, you know, we can. You know, there's always, amongst our communities, there are people who want to do the right thing, but it's actually sometimes a system around that stops them, but they are still able to buck it. And we've got loads of examples of how people and communities are doing the most incredibly imaginative things on little bits of money in their local backyard and in the local streets, and that's everywhere around the world. But those are the kind of seeds of hope for us. So thank you very much. Do you still want to ask your question, or is it? Yeah. Okay. Let's give you a chance before. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the conversation and the discussions we're having here. I'm Relian with the EAS working on gender equality, so I very much appreciate the last example, which is also amplifying a bit like women's economic empowerment. And also on the EU side for INPA and EAS, we have the Gender Action Plan, which also has a green and digital transition part for promoting gender equality. But back to my original question, which is more related to what you brought up in terms of like the profits being made by the fossil fuel industry. And what I've
also social platforms, not just fossil fuel, social, media.
Exactly, but I mean, in particular, I think the numbers are out there, what kind of profits been made and what kind of like went to the shareholders in general. I was just wondering what I'm missing so far, or maybe I've missed it, but the part of the disinformation that is out there that not only, from my point of view, leads to like the political shift we've seen currently with the elections. So, I mean, and we also, I mean, how are we going to address this? I mean, I'm happy to hear that our democratic systems are rather stable, but I'm wondering what kind of like the short-term or medium-term effects are in terms of having right-wing policies or politicians being entering our democratic systems in a way that they are actively promoting to dismantle the very same systems they used to get into power in the first place, and also seeing on the other hand like the widely spread disinformation about fossil fuels, also like leading to what kind of like subsidies or the externalization of costs of using carbon. What is that like? This kind of overall angle is like, I think, influenced and also probably widely spreading in social media. I mean, I'm somewhere in between generations here, so I'm not the social media like native, but on the other hand, that's still what I see. So in this case, like,
okay, you work for the Commission. Perhaps you won't answer this question. Do you feel the Commission's done enough in terms of regulating the platforms and being able to make sure they immediately understand misinformation is taking place and do something about it rather than leaving it as elective? Do you think enough has been done as a regulator?
I'm not really sure it's about regulating them at all. Like, maybe some sort of regulation is necessary. I'm not a digital like expert in this, but on the other hand, I mean, what kind of like actively we spoke a lot about narratives. What kind of like positive narratives are out there promoting this or putting something against this easy solutions, easy answers to
sadly,
those very complex
all right, I mean, but sadly, the rise of the deep fake and everything, it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, you've got digitally illiterate people who won't know about this in the main and are being fooled. And we're talking about large chunks of the population that fit in that box, unfortunately. But thank you for your question. Very briefly, I'm going to take two more, and of course, but you have to be brief because I want to go to Rion here, who've been, involved in transitions, sustainable transitions, just to share your thoughts because you've been listening and quietly reflecting. So I want to bring you in.
I just wanted to come to the cost issue that was mentioned before. And we have these huge numbers globally at the European level, and then we all go, wow, and we're struck, and we keep our shoulders, and we go continue. Because those numbers are not really useful for the policy that we need to implement. So, for example, now in Belgium, we try to do this cost of no adaptation for the public finance. What does it mean for public finance? And at the same time, the EU is looking at Belgium, hey guys, the 3%, you're not there yet. So it's a very topical debate. It becomes very concrete, but it's incredibly difficult to get those things even discussed or analyzed at the national level. So I was wondering if there's any advice for my narrative to my national government to actually get that done.
Tough question, very briefly.
So my question is for Alexander, but it really touches on many things that were said by others. So how do we get out of the bias where research and innovation is really channeling towards technological change for improving systems parts and optimizing the same systems rather than really channeling towards systems innovation where we are talking about the type of things, the participatory innovative approaches, when we're talking about other ways of looking at sustainability that go beyond direct causes and into root causes and into the impacts of the whole system. So how do we get that away from that bias and start to channel funding on research and innovation towards these other things that can be much more powerful?
Passionate but tough question, as you know. I'll start with you, Alexander, then yourself, and then we'll come back to you, Ira, and then end with you, Georgia. But all of you have to be really brief because it's nearly 2 hours over, and I'm being looked at to say you've got to stop. So please.
This is definitely one of the big questions now in terms of research and innovation policies, how to gear innovations towards this transformative change, how to make sure that innovations that we support are disruptive, meaning that come with new generations of technology that address the issues that we have, not just in an incremental way to improve things that are already in place. There are different ways how to do that. There are proposals for kind of agencies or instruments which would somehow leverage this disruptive potential of researchers, and then how to somehow make them implement in practice. But clearly, you mentioned some aspects of this, the participative nature, the mission-oriented type of instruments. So all this out there. I don't think we know a full solution. We're testing here and there. Some things may work better than others, also in different contexts. And then maybe just coming back to your question, I think it's very important that we've produce policies that address issues that matter to people. And one answer is policy experimentation. Right? This is a tool which also economists have been working on, for which some of them received Nobel Prizes. But to my mind, surprisingly, in Europe, we're not leveraging the potential of this tool at all.
Not at all.
It is mostly in developing countries, but we are somehow jumping to solutions sometimes far too quickly, instead of testing, trying what works, what does not. If it does not, you just terminate. If it does, you basically roll it out on a much broader
Absolutely.
scale.
The thing is that our politicians, especially the demographic of our politicians that run at the top end, would run scared if you say policy experimentation. Say, oh my God, no, risk. So, but there you go. But I think it's interesting. The developing world is using it much more, and in places like India and elsewhere, and Southeast Asia, they're really going for it in a way that's really quite exciting. Claire, disinformation.
Thank you. First, I would also want to jump in and say that we really desperately need more funding for social sciences and humanities, who are actually talking about the social innovations and the social transformations and studying them, rather than just the technological transformation. On disinformation. So disinformation is a feature of democracy. It's not a new phenomenon. What's new is that it reaches the globe at far speedier manners and can be amplified far more than in previous disinformation campaigns. We can look back, 80 years and find newspaper articles that are spreading disinformation. It's not new. So our democracy should be robust enough to deal with it. So it's not that our democracies are currently very robust. What is happening is that, and you use the word stability, what I said earlier is that our democracies are not in crisis, but they have inherent weaknesses. And what we need to be able to do is renew the democratic processes that kind of strengthen the aspects of our democracy that paper over those weaknesses. And so we have not been doing that, because when times are good, we don't see the need to bolster the democratic pillars upon which our society is built. And that's what we haven't been doing in the last few years. And then there have been other voices and actors that have stepped in to fill some of those voids. And disinformation is not new in a democratic context, but we can see its effect because of the amplification and the speed by which it spreads.
Great, thank you. Do you want to just come back, because we're leaking people. They're going.
I understand. I would just like to continue with a message of hope. I mean, not only regarding disinformation, but also populism and far-right groups that have gained power in certain member states. At the end of the day, I think the EU election results were not that bad. The moderate groups still have a majority in the European Parliament, and based on that, I trust that things will still move forward. But obviously, when it comes to disinformation, that challenge remains, and we need to address whenever it happens. This is, by the way, something that IEEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy, which I'm representing here, is doing on a daily basis by providing facts and policy recommendations that can be referred to also scientifically. So this is, I think, the message that we should spread, and also maybe suggest not only to the member states, but also to the EU institutions themselves.
Great, thank you very much. Riang, I want to come to you. There's a mic on its way.
Okay,
it's a tough one, I know.
No, I think I'm the last one. My name is Ryon Kim. I'm heading the Sustainability Transitions program at the European Environment Agency. And I think we've heard, actually, I feel like we've gone through so many different topics. And
I know, I feel as if we've been here all week.
Yeah, well, it's been a really intense debate, but it's also, we've poked at a lot of the tensions as well. But we've also heard some really, really interesting ideas which have been emerging, and they're there. And this is exactly what, just bringing it back to the report that we're launching today, the Sustainability Transitions Outlook, this is really the attempt to talk about how sustainability can actually go in stride with some of these emerging priorities. For those in Brussels, and for those who do know us, maybe you've heard us synonymic with the word data. We're known for our data. We're known for kind of giving state of the nature, state of water, and all the rest of it. And for the first time, we've tried to do a strategic foresight report. And it was actually a very astute observation, because we've precisely combined systems thinking with strategic foresight to produce this particular report, which is actually looking at it from a very systemic view. So I think, you know, as we heard from Laurent from JRC, you know, this idea of using foresight as a method, it's not meant to be prescriptive. We're not prescribing a path that we need to follow. We're just opening up the future of what some ideas could actually be. So I heard a lot about, okay, how do we do this, concrete, how do we get into implementation? And I just really invite you, and now we don't have physical copies because we're the Environment Agency, download, have a read, because I think there we've tried to actually capture some of the ideas using collective intelligence and using our participatory methods to really understand what could be some of the ideas that we need to unpack further, and then get into some of the concrete solutions that are there. The last thing I want to say is this is the stepping stone. This report is a stepping stone to our flagship report, the State and Outlook of Environment report. It's our key mandate as the European Environment Agency. We release this report every 5 years. It will be released next year, and this particular report was prepared with the thought that there would be a new commission coming in after summer. The SOER will hopefully be able to capture a lot of these solutions that are actually out there to be able to help chart a course of what could we pick up on, how could we take that further, how could we actually get implementation in sustainability to actually happen.
Are you planning to socialise the report amongst politicians?
Yes.
This year?
This report, we have. It's done. It's in their inbox.
It's in their inbox.
Yes.
So have you had a reaction yet?
Well, I look at my colleagues. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, don't worry. That's a toughie. Don't worry. But I mean, that's the most important thing. Thank you. Thank you all. And it's great to have had. It's been 2 hours. We don't usually do a 2-hour stint without a break. It's the first time we're doing it. So, but it tested. It worked. I think power to your elbow, Lena, and others from the team at the Environment Agency for creating the right context and debate framework for us. So thank you very much on that. Colleagues, what we do know is that this debate ain't going away. The only unfortunate thing is, and we know this about ourselves, that at times of adversity, those are the only times where we tend to act collaboratively against across borders and have a different sense of purpose. When we saw that in COVID times, and we've seen that in other times. But I suppose what we need to do is change that rhythm and rhyme about adversity cannot be the only basis on which we act. And the three things that are going to affect this agenda are politics, cost, and the strength of our democracies. We know that. That's absolutely the bottom line. And I think I congratulate you for creating a report that is much more of the kind that we need. I just hope that politicians listen, and that, you know, let's all have a sharp intake of breath for not too long. But in terms of what the elections are going to say, both this week and next week, and also in the autumn. But hey, we just have to brace ourselves. It's going to be another roller coaster, whether we like it or not. But I love the stories. Well, at the end of the day, what we do know is human nature can do amazing things with great passion and great imagination despite adversity. And so if we hold on to that, we can hope for a better world. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank our speakers for being with us. Thank you. Thank you for being a lovely, engaged audience and a group of people. Now, I'd invite you to go into that little kind of antechamber there where there's drinks and snacks for all of you. Take care. Thank you very much.